Darkcast Network. Welcome to the dark side of podcasts.
There is strength in finding your voice.
Hello and welcome back to Crime Over Cocktails. This is Tiffany, your host, and today I am here with Laurie Gilbertson, who is the founder and CEO of Tribeca Blue Consulting, and also was a New York City homicide prosecutor dealing with sex crimes, organized crime, corruption, all of it. You have an impressive resume.
Oh, well, thank you so much. What a lovely way to start.
Thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it.
I am so excited to be here. And I had been listening to some of your episodes. And as I was kind of telling you, I really love the way you pair talking about crime with talking about advocacy, because that is so unusual to hear and also so important.
You know, after doing this so long, I realized nobody was reporting on the after. Nobody cared after the story ended. And for most people, that's where their story begins. It deserves to be heard.
Absolutely. And I think that sometimes with true crime, people can really get into just the salaciousness of it, and just, it's exciting, right? I mean, there's so many podcasts, there's so many TV shows, there's so many movies. And I think sometimes people kind of consume that without realizing or just thinking about that these are real people and these are real lives. And I think one of your, taglines of, there are no winners in true crime, and there just aren't. Nobody really comes out well with any of it. And so looking at how it affects everyone, both during and after, is so important.
Everyone is going through something. And if somebody can at least listen to an episode and realize they're not alone, there is help out there, I've done my job.
Yeah, you've done your job.
So you worked 10 years doing district attorney's office, being a prosecutor.
I was. I knew going into law school that I wanted to be a trial lawyer. I knew that, but I didn't know what kind. I just know, I wanted to be in court. I wanted to be an advocate, but I wasn't quite sure what the subject matter was going to be. And so my very first day of criminal law class, the professor was just talking about cases and talking about, what happened in court with them and how they would make their way through and what the effects of them were. And I sat there just utterly fascinated, because they were about people, and they were about real people dealing with real things in their lives, and then ultimately affecting something in the legal system and how the legal system worked. And I knew from that day, that is what I wanted to be a part of. And it kind of went from there.
Your father was an attorney also.
My father still is an attorney. At the age of 82, he kind of refuses to retire because he loves it so much. So for my dad, taking it easy is just not working on Saturdays anymore. So he's a bit of a character, but yes. And he, is just one of those people who absolutely loves the law, loves everything about it. And that is what I grew up with. So it definitely had an influence on me.
Did you ever want to work on the defense side, or were you set on prosecution?
I did do some defense work. So I did a clinic my third year of law school. And so half our year was spent doing defense work and half the year was spent doing prosecution work, which was fantastic. And I thought it was such a great way for the law school to run it. And at that point, I really wasn't sure. And when I was applying to be a prosecutor, I also applied to all sorts of defender organizations as well, because I was leaning towards the prosecution side, but also, was thinking about the defense side. Ultimately, I went on the prosecution side because I really felt that that was where I could have the most influence, because prosecutors have a lot of power. It's undeniable. You have a lot of power. You represent the people. You have the resources of the state behind you, although people think those are just kind of unlimited. They are not. They're often very, very sparse. But I really felt that's where I could have the opportunity to do justice as opposed to representing one client at a time. I could have the opportunity to really shape things in a different way. And so I ultimately went to that side. And I also felt that, in a very kind of 24-year-old idealistic way, I could wear the white hat. I could do some good every day. And I realize now, and certainly started to realize then, that a lot of people don't look at prosecutors that way at all. Right? But that is how I felt then. And it's still how I feel on so many levels.
Well, no, that's good. I mean, I think a little part of all of us wants to change the world.
Yeah.
And if everyone just puts in their little part, I can see where it could possibly change one day, but everyone's got to do that little part.
And, the world changes just tiny bits at a time in people's lives a little bit at a time. And you were saying, if your podcast touches just one person and changes them a little bit, then you've changed the world in that way because it changes them and then it changes their life and then they affect other people. And there's that kind of ripple effect. And often we can get so frustrated thinking like, you want to have a big effect and how do you have that? And I really thought in my career as a prosecutor that it was just making somebody's life a little bit better. And whether that was helping them get property back after it had been stolen and navigate how to do that, which was not easy, wasn't made easy, lots of bureaucracy, whether it was, something like that, whether it was just being a listening ear to a victim, having nothing to do with the case, but just being someone who was there and then being their advocate, whether it was winning, a big case that changed the law, all of those things had an effect. And I don't think any of the effects were any better or any bigger than any of the others.
Speaking of changing some laws, have you seen any changes since your time doing this going in the right way?
I think so. And, it's been an evolution for me too. I think just as you mature in your career and as you have more experience, I think the perspective changes from being, 25 and being in a courtroom then. So as I was there over those 10 years, some things started to change. As I look at it now, yes, I mean, you see so many things becoming much more prevalent, even in the public awareness, things having to do with bail and its effects on people who can't afford to make bail and how that becomes such a kind of punishment. That if you can't afford to make bail, you end up in jail, whether even for crimes that, it's parking tickets or something nonviolent and things like that, that just really need to be reformed. So I see a lot of that. And that is so fantastic. And I would hope, people on kind of all sides of law enforcement can come together for that. And
Right.
Some of the other things I've seen, which, has to do with advocacy and with other things are just, in terms of gender, in terms of who is running things. When I was in the district attorney's office, almost all of the top people were men. And many of them were amazing, incredible mentors to me who I learned so much from, who were just talented trial lawyers who I, really helped shape my career. And now we look at so many offices and there are women in leadership. And that makes a difference in how things run, in how things are looked at. I think in my old office there out in Queens now, the district attorney is female. And I think her entire top leadership staff is female. And it's fantastic for change.
Girl power.
Yes, right? Yeah.
Sometimes I get frustrated because when you look at stalking cases, domestic violence, sexual assault, pedophiles, it's always like, is the law ever going to catch up?
The law takes a long time to catch up. It really does. And sometimes it feels like it's a glacial pace, and the legal profession in general often feels like, certainly in business, it feels like it's 15 years behind, where a lot of businesses are, and it's starting to catch up. But those kind of cases, yeah, I mean, it really requires a real kind of seismic shift in how we look at things. Look at sex crimes and rape cases and the kind of evidence that used to be allowed in, which was really just kind of blaming the victim kind of evidence. What was she wearing and where was she going and what had she been drinking, if she'd been drinking and why was she out? And that has changed. It's still not perfect at all, but it's changed. So there is hope that it does. I think it really does, but you need, dedicated people out there willing to do that. And also I think public perception, a lot outside of even the legal arena to shape public perception to help change the law, because it's all intertwined.
I wish if one state something gets passed that's super important for stalking, stuff like that all the other states would just kind of have to follow suit, because clearly a law got changed for a reason. There was a purpose. Mm-hmm. So why do you have to wait in another state for the same thing to happen to have the same law?
Right. And hopefully, reform in one state will affect others. And, it's also great to get some federal laws that change things. But of course, that's not how it is in state court. So you're going to have to, even if things change federally in all federal courts for, domestic violence and stalking cases, most of those are state crimes. So It's going to have to be each state individually. That would be a major change. So if you can affect that, hats off to you for that, for sure. An all over encompassing law for all states.
No, I would love to somehow. It's on my bucket list.
Hey, we'll chat. We'll chat some more.
Yeah. What would you tell somebody who has been sexually assaulted and they took the hard decision to take it to court?
Oh, gosh. Well, first of all, to be sure they have the mental health resources behind them to feel safe, to feel strong, to feel like they have people who are in their corner supporting them, so that when they do go to court, they have that already. Because, testifying in court, even to something that is not as traumatic as sexual assault, can be very scary. So, I testified in court as to statements I took from defendants or lineups that I witnessed. And I did that every single day. I was in court every single day, and I got nervous in the witness chair because it is a frightening place to be. So that would be number one, to really be sure that they have that kind of support behind them. The second thing would be to know how to advocate for themselves with the law enforcement and the prosecutors who are handling their case. I think especially in New York, so much of the way sexual assault cases are handled have really transformed, where we prosecuted cases. We handled cases from the very beginning all the way through trial, and it was called being vertical. And we didn't want sex assault victims to have to tell their story to the first police officer, and then to the detective, and then to the prosecutor responding, and then to the trial prosecutor. And then maybe it would switch and someone else. That's so traumatic. So we really changed things so that the victims would have one person from the beginning, barring emergencies, one person. And to really be sure to be open and honest about what is scary about things, what they really need to focus on, and to let the law enforcement and the prosecutors they're working with know those things. Because as prosecutors, we don't always know that. Every sexual assault is different. They're all traumatic. Everybody responds differently, and everyone responds to being in court differently. So just to do that. And the third thing I would think of is to know that they are playing an incredibly huge part in pursuing justice, and that they only have control over their part in it, that they get up, they can prepare, they can be supported, can tell their story. And that after that, hopefully justice is done. Hopefully the verdict goes the right way. But if in the worst of circumstances, it doesn't, that it doesn't have anything to do with them, that it doesn't affect the validity and the importance of what happened to them and the effect of them, that they are just one part of getting up and doing that. They are the most important part, but they are that part, and that there are just some things beyond our control. And to know that kind of bravery and playing that part in the system is absolutely incredible. And to hopefully kind of be fortified by that. And on a practical note, what I did with victims ranging from kids to older was to always bring them into the courtroom, to always show them where they were going to be, to kind of get them almost desensitized to it. And just to know that, the legal system can be a very scary place, but they're going to go in prepared. They're going to go in ready. They're going to go in with support. They're going to do their part. And then they're going to hopefully be able to leave and just kind of let that go and move on.
Oh, I like that, though, that they kind of get a sneak peek first so they don't walk in like, holy crap.
Yeah.
That would be very scary for anybody.
Really? I started doing it with kids because, you think kids really need it. And then I realized that everyone needs it. If you're not a professional witness, you're not in court all the time, you're not an expert or a police officer or an attorney who's used to kind of doing these things, court can be a very foreign and scary place. And so what can make it less scary is just getting used to it, knowing where you sit, knowing where you're going to walk, knowing where, for a sex assault victim or any victim, knowing where your family can be, knowing where you can look to get that support when you're scared. So it works. It is really important. So I really, really recommend that. And for victims whose representatives in court or prosecutors or whatever in court aren't doing that, maybe someone will hear this and know to ask, can you take me into court? Can you show me where I'm going to be?
Yeah, I didn't know that was a thing, but I think that is brilliant. Take a little bit of that unknowing away.
Right. Yeah, it helps. It really does.
Oh, I could see that totally. Because then you're like, okay, I know where I'm going. I know where to look at my mom and dad. The one thing that always drives me nuts is if somebody's been either abused or assaulted, and then their perpetrator is the one who questions them when they are their own or defense attorney. Why do we allow that?
Oh gosh. It doesn't happen often. It really doesn't. I mean, I think in my 10 years, it never happened. It never did.
It's usually a narcissist.
Oh, for sure. And playing on the power and the control that they get. But, you see it in movies and TV and all of that. Do you know of other real cases, other true cases where that happens?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, I fortunately didn't see it. And yeah, I mean, I really think in those cases, we shouldn't allow it. And, often when a defendant wants to go on their own and go pro se, represent themselves, I think probably every single time I saw this, the court will appoint a defense attorney to be their legal advisor, to sit at the table with them, to advise them on things. And I am of the same mind as you, that when it involves a sex crime or something like that, or God forbid, a child, that the perpetrator legal advisor should be the one questioning the witness.
Because usually when someone's on the stand, their whole goal is to not look at who did this to them for the most part.
Sometimes people find it incredibly empowering. Incredibly empowering to be there in court with a judges who treat witnesses, in court with the utmost respect, with a jury who is listening to them, having their day, having their time. Often people don't listen enough to victims, and having the support and being there and airing their story. And often I found victims found it just somewhat freeing to be in court and to know that, the guy sitting over there is the one that is hopefully going to jail or maybe in jail already for what they did to you, and that you're in court, you're protected, and you get to look over there and be like, you can't hurt me. You can't hurt me because here I am telling my story. So some people really did feel that. And it was always a pretty amazing thing to see.
Yes. I think I have heard it that way too, where it's like, you're not going to hurt me again. And I'm here to make sure of that. But I just feel like that would be a whole nother ballgame.
Yeah, for sure. And I think in the situation you were talking about with defendants going pro se and speaking to, and cross-examining their victims, I am going to have to do some research on that when we finish our podcast, because now you've got me completely curious. But I would imagine that judges would keep a pretty tight rein on that.
We had one actually in Florida. I want to say it was about a year ago. And this guy was wearily off his rocker. And he was screaming at the judge, obscenities. He had to be taken out a few times. It was a mess.
Wow.
And you just feel horrible for these people that have to sit here and say, well, this is what you did to me. And like, well, why would I do that to you? I don't know why you choked me. Like, and you say, I hurt you. You choked me.
It's surreal, right? Like it just seems absolutely surreal. But I would imagine in that case too, that the jury sees it.
Oh yeah, he's gone.
Good.
I mean, for the most part, I don't know anyone who's successfully got themselves off.
Well, the old saying, right? A man who has, right? A man who represents himself has a fool for a client.
Oh yes, I know that one. I think maybe the only one who might have been able to get away with it would have been Ted Bundy, because he did so much research.
Mm-hmm. And as many psychopaths are, he was a really smart and charming guy.
Oh, yes. Yes. Narcissist again.
Sense of theme.
Yes, they are charming. That's what makes it so scary, because you're like, oh my gosh, this person is everything I ever wanted. They say the right things. They do all the right things.
Yeah. And if I have fallen down the rabbit hole of cults lately. I watched a documentary on the Nixium cult, and then the whole court case that came out, and just got into the legal intricacies and was totally geeked out on that. And then was starting to kind of learn more about it. And I think there's so many parallels of the kind of narcissistic behavior that leads to abuse in cults, and the same kind of, domestic violence and stalking that we talk about in these kinds of cases that kind of pull people in and then lead to so much abuse.
They feed off the power, the control.
Yeah.
That's what they're after, especially if you have like 30 people following you doing whatever it is that you say to do. You got to think you got to feel like you are the head honcho here.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah. Yeah. But those are a whole other podcasts, right? Like there's the whole industry that has cropped up around that too. But it's so good, just like you're doing with this, to shine a light on these things, because without that, you have people in cults who, of course, don't understand that they are actually in them. And then when they get out, are so ashamed that they got caught up in it, just like, a domestic violence survivor may feel that too. Oh, it was my fault, or I made him angry, or all the things they're kind of brainwashed to believe that is so internalized after so long. And just as with a lot of these people in the cults, with domestic violence survivors, it's never their fault.
Right.
It's never their fault, but there's some deconditioning, that goes with that, to finally feel safe enough to understand that.
Right. No, absolutely. It's, oh, I shouldn't have wore that outfit, or, why didn't I leave sooner? But maybe you didn't have the financial means. If you're also being financially abused, how are you going to leave?
And there's, you asked how things are, I think a while ago, about how things are changing. And if I'd seen changes in the law or in the system. And, I do think that our view of domestic violence survivors, and certainly calling them survivors, even as opposed to victims, it's a word, but it's important. It's an important word, and important in how the legal system sees them, and important how they see themselves. And when I was prosecuting, we started prosecuting some domestic violence cases without the survivor, without the woman, because they would sometimes be so scared or also just so still under the control and power of the perpetrator that we couldn't get them to testify. And at the time, I certainly believe that was the way to go, to keep them safe and to keep their children safe. As I look at it now, all these years later, while it was revolutionary and it certainly, succeeded in getting some people out of very harmful, violent relationships that could have led to death, and saved their lives, there is something about doing that too that becomes very patronizing to that victim, that survivor, right? The system has now taken over the power. And where's their power? And I'm not saying that we shouldn't be doing that in some really dangerous cases, especially with children involved, because if the woman can't necessarily protect her children, sometimes, yes, the state does have to step in and do it. And I did have a case like that. And I remember doing it. I remember at the time being so, I couldn't understand why this woman didn't take her baby and leave. And I was very young. I was new. I was inexperienced. And I had this case where, her partner had taken a gun and fired at her, and it fired into the crib where the baby was. And the baby, thank goodness, was fine. And the woman was fine. And she still wouldn't leave him. And I prosecuted it without her and indicted him. And the case went forward and he went to jail and they were out of that situation. But like you say, the story starts there, and at that time, I understood that she needed to be out. And I don't know that I fully understood why she couldn't get herself out. It's something that came with experience. I was probably a year into prosecuting. And so ultimately the result was the right one. But there needs to be more support. There needs to be more understanding. There needs to be more public awareness. There needs to be more resources to help these women and not just have someone else step in and take power and control over them. Even though, like I said, I have no regrets. It was the right thing to do. And they were safe and they were ultimately separate and good. And she was great and the baby was great and the right result. But that's, that's a nuance that doesn't necessarily get addressed.
Well, that's what I was thinking. If the person that you committed this against doesn't show up, how does that affect the case?
Yeah. Well, it used to be in the law, right? You see it on Law and Order or whatever, the police officers respond and they ask the woman, do you want to press charges? And then she says yes or no. There's no such thing as pressing charges. It's not the victim's decision whether or not the case will go forward. That lies in the hands of law enforcement and ultimately prosecutors. So it's a total misnomer and people think that's how things work. So it doesn't. And when they don't show up, we would, it depends. If there were some real serious cases, some could be domestic violence, even in narcotics cases, homicide cases, organized crime cases, you get a material witness order from a judge. You convince a judge that this person is material to the case and that they are not going to show up on their own free will. And the judge will give you an order and you go out and you arrest them and you put them in jail and then they testify, or you arrest them and they are secreted away in a hotel room until they testify. And you use the power of the court to do it. So that's right. What you do.
That would always be scary. I would think say if you're in the witness protection program, you're in hiding and now you have to go to court. Now I have to come out of hiding. You don't know who this person has watching me. You don't know if someone's going to follow you from the courthouse. There's so much that just goes into all of this.
Mm-hmm. And there were a lot of precautions we could take. Certainly having police protection, often asking, certainly with, undercover officers or things like that, which is a different story. You can have the courtroom closed under certain circumstances. Sometimes having a witness's identity blocked, but still finding a way to allow for, confrontation, the right to confrontation and to cross-examine, so that the defendant certainly didn't have any constitutional rights violated. So the legal system has some things built in to protect against that and to protect against that kind of idea. But you never know what's going to, what a judge will rule and how it's going to work for a witness and what protections they're going to be able to have.
Right.
And nothing is foolproof.
Hi, I'm Ashley, a true crime fanatic.
I'm Dan, and I don't know anything about true crime.
Together, we host Fuck That, a true crime podcast that covers cases that highlight important topics that are often overlooked, such as wrongful convictions, domestic violence, and social inequities, sprinkled in with the occasional case with spooky themes. If you are looking for your next true crime fix delivered candidly with a hint of sarcasm, you can listen and subscribe to bi-weekly episodes of Fuck That wherever you listen to your podcasts. And don't forget to give us a follow on Facebook and Twitter at @FThatPod and at @FThat_pod on Instagram.
Have you ever worked a case where the judge did not go in the right favor? Like, how bad does that not only bother you, but probably that hurts your soul, I would imagine, because that wasn't the right call.
Yeah, you mean in terms of protecting witnesses or?
Yes.
Oh gosh, yes. Thank you so much for bringing that back. I really appreciate it. Yes.
Sorry.
No, it's important. Yes, many times. And the one that sticks out to me the most is a school shooting case that I tried. A shooting on a college campus that left a young man paralyzed. So he was in a wheelchair and, obviously couldn't walk. And this was part of our case that we had to prove that, in fact, the bullet had gone into his spine and the bullet had caused the lifelong injury of him being in a wheelchair and paralyzed. And the judge in that case decided that it would be too prejudicial for this victim and I should say survivor, who could not sit in the witness stand, obviously, because there was no accommodation at that point. I don't know now, maybe courtrooms have some of that there could be a ramp and there could be a way for him to get in, but he was going to sit in front of the witness stand. And that it would be too prejudicial for the jury to see him in a wheelchair. So what the judge made us do, over my extremely strenuous objection and probably my head exploding, was have us bring the witness in. He had to have, in a humiliating way, get himself and have someone help him into the witness seat so that when the jury came in, there he was. So they wouldn't see a wheelchair, know what was going on, any of it. And then he testified to his injuries. He testified to everything. And then the jury went out and he had to do the same humiliating thing of putting himself in the wheelchair and getting himself out. And as you said, it crushes your soul, the bravery he had to testify under cross-examination for days and other things in the case that were just so difficult and traumatic for him, just re-traumatizing him over and over. It absolutely blew my mind. First of all, it was stupid, honestly, because it was obvious. And I kind of said to the judge, what, are you going to ask him to stand up and walk out of court? He can't do that. He's in a wheelchair because this guy shot him in the back. That's
right,
why
that's the end result.
Right. And the same judge treated the defendant in that case, who obviously every defendant should be treated, in court with the courtesy allowed everyone in court, right? You're a criminal, but you are a criminal defendant. And the same judge in the case who made the victim go through this humiliating exercise. When the defendant walked in and his birthday fell, during the court case, judge wished him a happy birthday. And I just, the injustice of it, just the very perception even of it was so overwhelming to me. So yes, when you ask about things like that, that is the one that sticks out the most in my head. Ultimately, justice was done. Defendant went to jail for a very long time. And the victim survivor in that case got to face him at sentencing while, in his wheelchair, and turn right to him and say, why did you do this? Why did you do this? This was so crazy that you felt the need to do this, because here I am in this wheelchair for the rest of my life, and here you are going to jail for the rest of yours. But he got a little bit of closure. And that ultimately was why I became a prosecutor, just to give him a little bit of something. Couldn't fix that, but he got that.
That's good. At least he got justice.
Yeah. Not
was
easy.
the perpetrator like another student?
No, he was not a student. And that's kind of what the argument that he had with the students arose out of. They were at a bar, and they were at a bar off campus, and the perpetrator and some of his friends wanted to get into the bar, and the young man he ultimately shot was the bouncer at the bar, and he didn't let them in. And so they were angry, and they followed them back to the campus. The perpetrator and his friends, none of them were I don't think any of them were students at the time. So they followed him back to the campus and shot not just him, but other people, and into a full crowd of
wow.
People. Fortunately, more people were not injured or killed. Unfortunately, Several that were lasting injuries.
Apparently, you didn't need anything to drink, dude.
Yeah. Didn't.
No.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes I feel like the perpetrators get more rights than the survivors do. And that's another thing that just drives me nuts.
Drove me nuts as a prosecutor often. I mean, that is our legal system. And I would imagine if you had a defense attorney come on here, they would say the exact opposite and say that they feel that their clients don't get as many rights as the state has or the victims and witnesses get. It's all a matter of that perspective. The beautiful thing about our legal system is the protections that it affords people and the fairness, hopefully, and the justice that you get from it. That is our legal system in an idealized sense, right? In on paper, in the ideals, and yay, America and our legal system. In reality, it's quite different. And I often had that feeling many, many, many times, especially the example I just gave you.
Right. I don't think I could ever be an attorney because I would be yelling at the judge.
Well, you get to do that sometime. You really try not to because you don't want the judge to throw you in jail. But there were times when your patience just gets fried. And that was probably, I don't remember if I yelled. I'm sure I was quite vehement in my objections because I was the one who then had to go tell this poor kid that this is what was going to happen and that I couldn't prevent it. So, but yes, I believe that our system does need to come around and change to the idea that the protections are not just there for the defendant, although the defendant is the one who is going to have the biggest impact in terms of their liberty or any other consequences from a case. But the protections need to be there for everybody. The protections need to be there for the witnesses. Protections need to be there for people who are afraid of retribution. The protections need to be there for rape victims like they are now to not be questioned about things completely irrelevant to the rape. So in its own glacial pace, the system is changing somewhat.
Now, like when we talk about like the Jodi Arias case and stuff like that, sex was a huge part of that. And it was weird to see it put on the other side.
Mm-hmm.
Because usually we're blaming the victim or the survivor. But now it was like, oh, well, look at what she was doing. And it was kind of like, well, dang. But I mean, people ate it up like ice cream, people love sex crime, a good story. They love it.
It
But
sells.
it does sell, but it wasn't that common to see them use that strategic plan on the defense side. So I think that was my first wow case that I saw like that.
Yeah, what struck you so much about them using it that way?
Just because they never really go down that rabbit hole for that. Usually it's, they might talk about her obsession, stuff like that, but they never get into the kink and all of that. She liked this and she liked it this way. And first of all, but I mean, what did that have to do with the case? Nothing.
Misogyny runs deep. It really does. It does.
Yeah.
And so, you have an attractive woman as a defendant and there's a ton of sex in there and you can get really kinky about it and crazy and do that. It's just a distraction, right? I mean, there wasn't, from what I know of the case, right? I didn't completely follow it, but I know the basics. It wasn't so I mean, the actual intricacies of it weren't so relevant. The facts of what they were doing in their relationship was relevant. And would it have been the way if it was a male defendant? What do you think? Right? Would it have been?
You never know. You never know.
You just don't.
I mean, if it was some bald guy, about 300-400 pounds, they might have left that part out. It's what's going to sell newspapers, what's going to sell in the media, all that stuff.
And as I recall, she didn't really shy away from it too much in terms of being really explicit about things. And didn't she get on the stand and testify for days and days?
Oh, yeah.
So
she might have been on the stand for a month.
Yeah. I mean, it does, when you are a criminal defendant and you get on the stand and start talking about things, it does open you up to quite a bit of cross-examination on so many different topics, really wide ranging. So, that may have, if it's something she brought up, then the prosecution is able to go there for sure.
Right. It's just crazy.
It is all a little crazy, isn't it? Like some of the true crime cases that you see on TV, they often, don't feel real, right? Like you think, oh, you couldn't make this stuff up.
Oh,
because, in fiction, it kind of has to make sense. And when it's true and it happens, it doesn't really have to. No, it doesn't have to make sense. It doesn't have to be organized. It doesn't have to be fair. It just, because it happened.
Right. I saw, were you covering the Brian Kohlberger case? I did see some things online.
Yeah, I did some legal analysis on that case.
So what do you think was behind his crazy thought process?
Oh, gosh. That is another one where I truly, from the evidence and looking at what he's done, seems to me like just a true psychopath, and the thought process being he is going to do what he wants and see what he can get away with. And I have encountered certainly a lot of cases as a prosecutor, really dealing with everything from crime scene on up. And there were a few of them that were really chilling to me and that I truly felt in the presence of evil. Not just somebody who committed a stupid crime or even committed, something like this shooting that I told you about. While that person was, I think a terrible person, did a terrible thing, I didn't feel in the presence of, evil in that way. He did an evil thing, but I didn't feel that. And there were other defendants, a few that I did, that I when I think about it now, it still chills me. And the Brian Kohlberger case is one of those. And even just reading the indictment in that case, which, lays out all the evidence against him, even just thinking about what the planning that had to go into, killing 4 people in a very kind of ritualized way. And covering his tracks that way and being so fascinated with serial killers and wanting, it seems like he wanted to experience that for himself. And it really feels just evil, just so evil, just like a psychopathic evil. Not to be too out there with it, but that's what it's felt like to me in commenting on that case and in really delving into it. Because when you think about what that crime scene must have been like, just the blood, the terror of the victims, and what it must have taken to get in and out and to plan it that way, it just, even for me who has seen a lot, it kind of astounded me.
It's methodical.
It's a lot to get to me, and that one did.
Yeah, I can totally see that. Do you think the fact how serial killers are put on, I don't want to say a pedestal, because clearly these are bad people, but people, yes.
No, I think we can safely say that, yes.
But, people, they write books, they make movies, they have t-shirts, they have, oh, I got the mug. You know what I mean? What do you want? They have it. But do you think that influences people to say, I'm going to be that next one?
With the Son of Sam laws, which prohibit criminal defendants from profiting from their crimes, they can't, write a book and get money from it. But that doesn't stop the media and the public from being absolutely fascinated by it. It's a really interesting question. Does all of that play into it? For some, it seems to, that they want the media notoriety, and that's how they want to make a name for themselves. And I think that's why so many media outlets are really encouraged to use the victims' names, not the killer's name, to focus attention on the victims, the people who have suffered, their families, as you know, and not give that to them. It seems to me that if you suffer from or are affected by, or just that's, you're someone like Brian Koberger, which seems to me he's got that psychopathology, that the media attention is just a bonus. And the rest of it is probably going to happen anyways.
Right. Some people, they just want to know what it's like to kill somebody, which is the weirdest thing to me. Like, what makes you think you get to play God? I will never understand that. I don't want to understand that.
Yeah. I mean, I know you've had, psychologists and people on your show who can probably give you a much better understanding of that kind of pathology than I can. But it's pretty scary. Scary stuff.
No, it's very scary. Absolutely.
Yeah. And we'll see what happens with that case.
Yeah, because they're dropping bombshells all over again. So it's crazy. It's like new stuff comes out almost every week. So
yeah. How do you feel being so enmeshed in all of this all the time with the podcast? Does it get to you?
So it used to a little bit, because I love the shows, and I don't know why. Like, I think a lot of us women do. And I think after time, it dawned on me why, is because I think we can see ourselves in a lot of these stories. And it's kind of familiar to us. And we're like, oh gosh, like light bulbs come on, like, oh, this has happened to me before. This has happened to me before. And then you see the end result of what could have happened to you. And I think for me, that's what kind of drew me in. It took me a minute to get there, because I'm like, why do I love it so much? What's wrong with me? But the more I dissect it, and that's even how I totally flipped a switch with my podcast, is because you realize this mostly happens in childhood. Childhood trauma sets people up for their adulthood. So if you're a child and you've been molested, neglected, abused, you have a really good chance of being a perpetrator yourself when you get older, and maybe not even realizing it. Generational abuse, huge. It's, if this is the way you were treated, it's normal to you. So you don't know what's wrong with it. Same with like pedophiles. Most of them, they were victims themselves. And so it's just understanding maybe why people do the things they do, and not to give them a hall pass or anything. But sometimes you can be like, I don't know if this person had any other choice than to become this monster.
Yeah. Wow. That is very profound. And incredibly self-aware.
Yes.
Yeah.
And for a little while, that's like all I watched. And then, you dream about things and it's like, okay, you got to watch like Family Feud or something.
Cleanse your palate a little bit with something like amusing and not requiring a lot of thought.
Exactly. But
Yeah.
I'm glad I did, because that was my aha moment. And then that's when I knew I was no longer going to report on all these crimes. I wanted to talk with survivors about what they've been through. Where did this start? What was their childhood like? A lot of these people who end up in abusive relationships were abused as children, or they were molested by their father. So sex to them is nothing. It's void. It means nothing anymore. So when they leave the house, most of them leave, either at 18, could even be before 18, because they just want out of the situation that they're in. And they turn to the streets. How do they make money? Because now that's been embedded in them, that this is how I survive. This must be okay. This is what I'm good for. I'm good for sex. And it's a shame. And it's time we got to flip that switch and realize that there's so many different avenues out there today, different modalities of therapy that can help you flip that switch in your brain. You don't have to live like this forever.
And life and create a different life.
Absolutely.
Yeah. It makes, with you need the resources and the support to do that, because it's hard work enough to do that. The therapy and the changing old patterns is difficult work, and it is work. So you need to have the support to be able to do that work with someone who you can, who victims and people can trust and feel safe with.
Right. And it's hard.
Yeah.
It's hard confronting yourself with what you've been through.
Yes.
People don't want to face that. They want to shut it down. Look at John Stamos just came out and said he was sexually abused as a child and that he just packed it away. What do you think that did to him for his whole life? He's been living in his own prison.
And making it look, I didn't know that about him, but to know him, to think of him as an actor, I mean, look at him, successful, all that, like, wow.
Yeah, it's crazy. You just never know who's walked in what footsteps.
You don't. There's a lot of gray in the world, right? And there are some things that are black and white, for sure. And there are some things in looking at crime and perpetrators and victims that can be very black and white. But there's so much more gray. And prosecutors are better when they see the gray. Defense attorneys are better when they see the gray. Judges are better when they see the gray. I mean, it just makes for much better outcomes, all told. But yeah, there is so much of that. I think everything you're talking about, we're only starting to realize and to see. And maybe not to realize, but to actually face, to have it be in the public consciousness of it.
I love it's becoming more open. People are able to say, this happened to me and this is real and I don't want to live like this anymore. Like, I can't tell you how many guests I've had on my show that thought they were alone. They had no idea there were any resources. Some of them held in what happened to them for 30 years. They didn't tell their parents, their spouses, nobody knew.
Wow.
That's a hard burden to carry for 30 years.
And then there's some connection and they feel okay to face it, or at least are willing to start that process. Yeah, you see it, I have 3 teenagers, and I see it in kind of this new generation that talking about, my kids and their friends, they know all the language. They know all the lingo. They can talk about everything. The mental health and advocacy is just so open for them. When I was a teenager, I couldn't imagine talking about a lot of the things that they talk about. I mean, granted, they are also facing school shootings and the world we live in and so many other things that were different, certainly from when I was their age. But I look at them and I am so kind of inspired that this is the world that they live in, but also this is the world that they are helping to change and helping to make so much more open. And I'm just astounded, by some of the conversations that I kind of overhear, with all of them, or the things that they just say, and that they're just removing this whole stigma of being depressed or having suffered a trauma or abuse or, needing mental health support, that it's becoming just so accepted. And hopefully that will make it less common that you encounter people like you've talked about, who had to wait 30 years to feel connected enough to share, or people like you said, John Stamos, who couldn't reveal anything for all that time.
Yes. It's like, let people breathe,
Yeah. And no, it's not their fault. They're not to blame.
Yes, that was another big one. One of my guests, he was 9 and he was sexually assaulted in a movie theater.
Oh my God.
And by a man. He was there with his friend and he got up to go get popcorn. And there was a guy at the counter, offered to buy it for him, and then took him in the bathroom. And he didn't realize that men had sex with men. So he was very ashamed. He's a little boy, he didn't understand what was happening. Mm-hmm. And then you go through does this mean I'm gay? Like, does this mean, it's like this whole thing. And it's like, no, like, this was not your fault. You were hungry, like you did not ask for this. And so now he does group counseling and, they're all raising their vibrations and they're all on the path to better. And I love it. I love it. And it's just so important to get all this out because everybody deserves to live their life the way that they want to.
Mm-hmm. Unless you're a serial killer, then you don't.
Yes. Or a pedophile.
Yes. We're going to carve some exceptions into that statement, but I know what you mean.
Yes. Everyone deserves to be the best version of themselves.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, that is it. I am so grateful for this conversation that started with talking about prosecuting and has ended with talking about also started with changing the world and is veered into other ways to change the world. It's really lovely.
Oh, thank you. Yes. Is there anything that you wanted to add for survivors or for anything that you can think of?
Oh, gosh. I think we have covered a lot of ground. And I think that, you have said it probably better than I could right now, that people deserve to live their lives and live their best lives in the best way they can. And a lot of my part of that was people who were coming into the justice system. And nobody wants to be a part of the criminal justice system. Nobody wants to be enmeshed in that as a victim survivor or as a defendant. The only people who kind of want to be there are the attorneys and the judge. And often I think the attorneys and the judge don't always want to be there. So it is just for them to know that it can be a difficult process, but that things are somewhat changing. And that there are advocates there is support there, and to really consider, even in the difficult position when you are the victim of a horrendous trauma, of being kind of tapping into the strength that you have to be a part of it and to really help justice be served. because it is very, very difficult, not impossible, but very difficult for justice to be served without the voices of victims and survivors. We need those voices. We need them in court. We need them wherever we can have them. And so the more people who speak up, the more people who tap into that strength that they may not think they have, but I have seen it hundreds of times that they do. And the more people who do that, the more their voices will be heard, and the more ultimately people will be able to live their best lives and know that, well, someone else did it. Now I can go do it too. Now I can help do justice. Now I can go, have my voice be heard. Because while I, as a prosecutor was able to prosecute some cases without victims, ultimately never as effective as a victim having their voice be heard. And there is strength in finding your voice that way. So I just encourage them, no matter how hard it seems, to try to do that.
I love that. Yes. You hold the power. Use it.
Right. And come out stronger for it and pave the way for others.
That's right.
Yeah.
Do you want to mention about your foundation in case anyone is interested?
Sure. Well, it's actually not a foundation, so not the work that you're doing. No, I actually have. No, it's fine. I just don't want to take credit for something I'm not doing. So after working as a prosecutor, I eventually left that world and moved on to some other things. And what I'm doing now is I am an entrepreneur and I run my own business, and it is a communications company. It's called Tribeca Blue Consulting, named for one of my favorite neighborhoods in New York City, near where I used to live. And the blue because there was another Tribeca. And so I needed to add something to be able to copyright the name. So Tribeca Blue Consulting. And I basically help people communicate better. So I do media training for people who are going out, on the news. I'm podcasts in the media. I do public speaking training, and I do presentation skills training. So if you're really afraid of getting up and talking and letting your voice be heard, then I am the person who is there to help you gain that confidence, gain that clarity, and be able to go out and speak out and have your voice be heard. Find that voice and get it out there. So that's what I do. I do one-on-one coaching. I do trainings and workshops in various organizations. And I also do keynote speaking on lots of different topics. So you can find it at my website with the incredibly long name of TribecaBlueConsulting.com. I should fix that. And you can always reach out to me there. My email's on there. And I'm also on LinkedIn under Laurie Gilbertson.
I'll put the links in the show notes too.
Perfect. Sounds great. Always happy to hear from people.
Yes. Yay.
Yeah. That's it.
Well, thank you so much for being here. I really do appreciate it. This is great.
Too. This was lovely. No cocktails, but lots of crime talks.
Yes. If you know somebody who could benefit off of this episode, please share it with them. I want to thank all my listeners for actually trusting in my podcast and accepting what I have to offer. I would love to know if one of my episodes has made an impact on your life. And even if it's the smallest way, if you would please drop me a message on any of my socials. It would just make my heart so happy to know that these episodes are reaching people and that people are appreciative of the content that I have. Which brings me to, are you following me? Because how are you supposed to know my updates? You can find me on Instagram, TikTok, LinkedIn, YouTube, and my websites, of course. Both links to the website are also at the bottom of the show notes, and even from those sites, you can get to all of my social media accounts. I love you guys, and we'll talk crime another time. Bye.